Welcome everyone to the presentation, Customer Usage and Insight, Paving the Road to Optimize Cloud-Based Business Models. This presentation will be delivered by Mr. Holger Kisker, Principal Analyst from Forrester Research. My name is Todd Steele, Senior Product Manager for SafeNet Incorporated, who is sponsoring this presentation today. With the emergence of service-based delivered business applications as a clear alternative to on-premise solutions, software publishers are trying to adapt to new ways to monetize their solutions in the cloud. One of the key fundamental aspects of a service-based offering is better understanding how your customers are using the product. Customer Usage and Insight provides software publishers the ability to offer usage or utility-based pricing, allowing customers to pay for what they use, as well as providing insight on how to build a better offering. Questions can be submitted throughout the presentation using the questions button in the BrightTalk window, and we will follow up after the presentation. Well, without further ado, let's hear from the industry experts' take on this. Holger, over to you.
Thank you very much, Todd, for the introduction, and thanks to everyone and welcome for joining this webinar today around the software market and the dynamics and the transformation that the market is going through, and how important really deep insights into customer usage and customer behavior already is and will further become in order for software companies, for ISVs, to be successful in this software market. So I would like to structure the presentation today in the following way, that I will start with an overview on the software market, the sizing, how it's growing, but also showing to you that the software market is going through fundamental transformation and changes in the market. That it's specifically important to understand how flexibility plays a growing and more important role in the software market. Flexibility around licensing and pricing, which will be the second part of the presentation, and then flexibility about different deployment models, and here we will talk about cloud computing specifically. It all adds up to the point that customer insights drives these changes, and ISV software companies need to stay on top to have timely customer insights, and how this is changing the overall processes within a software company. That's the last part of this presentation. How the whole development process from collecting requirements through the sales cycle, through support, through upgrades, all is changing, and how customer insights are needed in order to drive these changes. We'll conclude then in a short list of key takeaways at the end of the presentation. So on this chart we see the size of the total software market reflected in the spendings by companies and governments, and you see that along our Forrester definition, the software market is $522 billion in 2012. And you see here in our segmentation, it consists of an operating system, of middleware, of the largest part, which is standard applications or packaged applications, as some people say. But then on top, also, of course, custom-built applications play a significant role. So those add up to $522 billion. And you can see here in the sizing over the years that there was a dip, of course, from 2008 to 2009, which then kind of recovered already a year later. And that is, of course, due to the financial recession that we faced, and that also did hit the IT market in general. But it was interesting to see that actually the software market did suffer the least as compared to all the other IT segments. So hardware, equipment, communication, and also services were hit harder by the recent recession. Interestingly also, now in the recovery phase 2010, 11, and the ongoing years, software is actually the fastest growing IT segment. So it's an excellent market to be in. It's great to be in the software market, to be a software vendor. We really predict a solid, an average, greater than double-digit growth year over year, specifically in the application part, so standard and packaged application of software. So it's a great growing market. But it's also a market where not every individual segment, every niche, every software application area will grow at the same speed. So it's important to understand within the strongly growing software market, where are the changes, how is the software market changing, and why is it changing. So on this chart, we show what we at Forrester regard as the three major macro trends that influence and shape not only the software market, but the whole information technology market, but of course also relevant for software. The first we call the transition from IT to BT. What we mean by that is the transformation from information technology to business technology. So technology becomes more and more integral part of the business processes itself. It's not just an enabler function anymore. It is part of the business, and we see that also reflected in the increasing interest of the business people at your customers in the kind of technology, in the software that they are using. And not just the interest, also then, of course, the influence that business is taken in the decision process when selecting new technology, when selecting new software applications and making investment decisions. So that is one of the influencing factors. The next is what we call the IT industrialization. And that is similar to what we have seen in the manufacturing industrialization like 70 years ago. So 70 years ago, standards have emerged in the manufacturing processes. A globalization was coming up, a commoditization in many areas, and by now the IT market has become a pretty mature market already. So we see similar effects kicking in from standardization through globalization and commoditization in some areas. And the third area is what we call the consumerization of IT. And this originates from what we all experience in our private life, how we deal with technology, and how easy it often is to access technology with our mobile phones, with other mobile devices, anytime and anywhere. And of course, we carry those expectations towards to our work environment, which very often is lacking significantly behind with that regard. But the expectations are there, the demand is there, and certainly, also the business environment of information technology, or here of the software market, needs to support the consumerization of being used anytime and anywhere. Now, how does the software market react to those big themes of major changes overall in the IT? And I really would like to paint the picture, kind of black and white, because I think software companies, to be really successful in the future, have to make clear decisions for their portfolio if solutions will either go to the left or will go to the right. On the right-hand side, future successful solutions of software applications will be very specialized. They will be very dedicated, tailored to some high value and high complex business process and business activities. They will be verticalized, so specific to industry processes. They will be intelligent, and overall, we call this, for example, at Forrester, smart computing. So it will be integrated solution that, for example, include physical world awareness through sensor technology, integrate those into analytic capabilities, into process decision management, and then transactional system. So highly specialized, highly verticalized solution where companies will be also able and willing to pay a premium for that side. But the majority of software solutions to be successful really in the future, we need to go to the left-hand side, which I labeled here pervasive software. So in this area, software needs to become much, much easier to buy. It needs to become much easier to install, easier to use. And the examples here are, of course, cloud computing as a new deployment model, mobile applications as a new consumption model, and much more, user-centric around specific roles that the software is meant to support. So here in these solutions, the software is seamlessly integrated into the business processes from the early decision and requirement analysis through the implementation and then, of course, the life cycle of the usage and consumption. So software really needs to become pervasive in order to be able to compete and be successful in the future on this side of the change. So it's all about new flexibility. So the new software paradigm I like to describe in four terms. The first off would be buy as you like. So your customers want the flexibility to choose the license model that really fits their business and their own internal budgeting processes, whether it's a perpetual license or a subscription license, whether it's pay by use, whether it's upfront payment. Buy as you like is the number one of the flexibility paradigms. Pay as you like is the next one. So what is the metric that is behind the price of software, whether it's a fixed price or whether it's a very dynamic pay by use price? So you will need to support as a vendor a number of different metrics in order to satisfy the demand from your customers. And while some, based on their own internal budgeting processes, might prefer fixed price, others will certainly prefer a more dynamic pricing model. The third element is deploy as you like. And here we are talking about cloud computing. Certainly the future will be hybrid cloud models, which means a combination of on-premise and cloud solutions. Not everything will move to the cloud, no question, but a lot will actually do. And what we will see is a combination that we call hybrid models. But your company customers should be able to choose what they actually want to run either in their on-premise environment or in the cloud. And the last, not least, is access as you like. So where you want to consume it, when you want to consume and access the software, and by what device. Also here, your customers are demanding a lot of flexibility that you need to provide to the market. So software companies need to address all these 4 points. They need to become much, much more flexible from the technical architecture as well as from their business model and their engagement model with the customers. And of course, they need to have the capabilities to do that from the internal processes, but the same, of course, from the technology platform that their software is built on, in order to provide this flexibility that you see here addressed on that slide. Now, in the next part, let's talk first about the bullet points 1 and 2 here, buy as you like and pay as you like. And then in the third part, we will more talk about deployment and access models like cloud computing. So let's first talk about new software licensing and new software pricing models. We have seen that the total software market, specifically for standard applications, for packaged applications, is really growing very fast. But if we split, the spending that companies are doing into different licensing models, we actually can see that until recently, in 2008, the traditional licensing models, which is typically a capital expenditure with a perpetual upfront payment where the company actually buys and owns the software and then pays an annual maintenance fee. This used to make up for more than 80% of the total spending into software licenses. And at the same time, other models which are more dominated by subscription deals, so those are typically more operational spendings and not capital spendings, they were less than 20%. But you can see here that over the years, by 2012, already, the traditional capital spendings, the perpetual model dropped below 70% of the total market share, and more flexible subscription kind models make up for more than 30%. And we really see this trend going on. So there will be a point in time, definitely, where these curves come closer and closer and eventually maybe even meet, which means, of course, that a company that wants to address its total market opportunity needs to cover these different licensing models, because if you as a software vendor offer your software only in a CapEx model with a perpetual license and no subscription model, for example, you are already blocking out maybe 30% of the possible addressable market for your product, for your software. Okay, so companies, really, your customers, they want more flexibility. And at Forrester, we're doing a lot of surveys, screening the market and asking software decision makers about their strategies on buying software, how they're spending their money, like in the previous slide. And on this slide, asking them, what features are important to them in software licenses. And what we clearly see is the need and the demand for more flexibility. So you see at the top item is really companies want to be able to seamlessly scale up their usage of software within an existing license agreement. So without renegotiating the contract, having the possibility, of course, to grow their usage. Okay. This is something that most software companies already offer, the upscaling possibility. But you can also see here that companies, 75%, so not significantly less, really would like to have the flexibility to be able to scale down the usage of the software, which is something that many software companies do not really provide yet. So because of changing business processes, or maybe because of M&A activities, because of a carve-out, companies really want, or because of changing economical conditions, companies want the scalability in order to reduce their usage and consequently pay less for software. A payback guarantee would be a highly desired feature as well as scalability between products. So models where you can buy in, a kind of internal token money or some other, currency, which you can shift the licensing rights between different products of one vendor. And then last but not least, demand of 50% and more about the pricing to be much more connected to the real value that the software actually delivers to the company. And for example, many applications are following a user-based pricing, but in some cases, how many users are using the software might not be, a very good reflection of the value that is actually delivered to there. So other metrics that really connect to the success and the contribution of the software to the business would be highly appreciated by your clients to be implemented in your licensing and in your pricing models. And on this chart, you see that this change to more flexible pricing actually holds true in both of the deployment models, whether it's in the cloud, and these are the upper two pictures, the blue and the green, or on premise, which are the lower two bars. So on the upper side, we see here in blue to what extent companies are currently licensing cloud applications in a CapEx model. And to no surprise, this is, of course, the minority. The green bars on the upper right side reflect the majority of cloud pricing models. But the interesting point is that 45% currently follow a flat rate OPEX subscription rate and 28% a really dynamic use-based pricing. The preference when we ask these companies is really to increase the very dynamic use-based pricing very much so. So 45% actually would rather like to use a dynamic pricing model, so to move away from a still more static flat rate subscription to a dynamic subscription OPEX model. And now it's interesting to see that on the lower part of the picture, we see a similar trend also even in on-premise installation. Of course, as of today, and also in the near future, the blue bars here are larger than the green bars, which means the majority of actually 69%, the first tier currently, license on-premise software in a CapEx model. Okay, but we see that the preference here over the next 1-2 years also drops down, and already 25 plus 7 for 32% of the licenses on-premise are done in an on-premise subscription model, so that fits nicely to the earlier picture. But here's also the preference would be already today that 20% would like to buy their on-premise software as a flat rate subscription, and another 20 actually in a dynamic pricing model. So very much the demand for more flexibility in the pricing model, and in order to support that, of course, you need to be able to monitor that metric, whatever the metric is, and the more dynamic this metric becomes to an hourly, a minute-based usage, a tracking of number of orders, a tracking of the volumes that are processed, whatever it is, you need to have then this licensing and tracking platform to support the model. So after licensing and pricing, let's come to the other element of flexibility, which we touched briefly on. That's the deployment of software. And here we really will see that cloud solutions in the future will cannibalize the traditional software market. So it is a very important decision point these days for software companies to engage into new cloud models. You might, of course, say, and I hear that a lot, the concern of cannibalizing your own traditional, business of on-premise software solutions. But I typically always respond in saying, well, it's much better if you cannibalize your own traditional business than let your competition cannibalize this. And this is the fastest growing market in the software deployment areas. So it's rather of, do you want to sit on the still, bigger part of this cake, which is on-premise software solutions, but that has much less growth to offer over the next years? Or do you really, engage into the very fast-growing cloud market, which at that point in time might still be significantly smaller, but will be significantly growing faster than the on-premise market? Let's first start with a definition of cloud computing, because it's not a brand new topic, of course, anymore, but there is still quite a bit of confusion about what cloud computing actually is, and therefore I usually start and do at that point a kind of a definition and taxonomy. So cloud computing, what it is about, it's about the sharing of IT resources. And it's the sharing of different IT resources, whether it's hardware, middleware, software, or even human resources, okay? And it's shared via internet, pay-by-use, self-service. This is the pure definition of cloud computing. And you can read this up also, for example, from the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. It's more like a 20-plus page PhD thesis there, but if you boil it down to like one sentence, I think this is really crystallizing in these 4 key parameters for cloud computing. However, we know that there are a lot of market offers out there that do not necessarily fulfill all of these 4 parameters in 100%. So there is another gray area of solutions that to some degree fulfill one or the other element, but maybe not necessarily everything at once. And therefore, we have developed at Forrester what we call our cloud taxonomy. And the cloud taxonomy has 2 dimensions. On the x-axis, our cloud taxonomy describes what is the resource that is shared. Okay, so it's all about IT resource sharing. It's infrastructure, middleware, application, or we at Forrester, we also add information and processes, so the people-centric resource to it. Then the next question is, with whom is this resource actually shared? So either it's shared only within your own company, so this is typically a shared services team, and it's shared between employees, subsidiaries. Then we call it a private cloud. Or it's actually coming from an external service provider, so from the outside, the resource, but maybe it's only a dedicated environment, again, for your company. Or maybe it's just for your company and a number of other peers or community, but you know exactly with whom you're sharing. Okay? In this case, we call it at Forrester a virtual private cloud. There are also other terminologies like a hosted cloud, a trusted cloud. And on the top layer of sharing, you as a consumer of the cloud resource, you don't actually know with whom you're sharing. Okay, and in this case, we call it a public cloud. Now, if we combine these 2 dimensions, the level of sharing, 3 different levels, time, 4 different resources, we actually come up with this picture that describes Forrester's cloud taxonomy. So cloud computing along this taxonomy actually consists out of 12 different and distinct markets on its own. And that is one of the biggest reasons why there is still so much confusion around cloud computing. Because if someone is saying, well, it's a very mature market and it's a tool market and it's about in-house usage, he's perfectly right, because maybe he talks about the infrastructure virtualization tool market. And if someone is saying, this is a very early stage. We have very few examples there yet in the market. It's all about external people sharing. He's also right, because maybe he talks about business process as a service, the very upper right. So it's important for people talking about cloud to make sure they are actually talking about the same market. Now, each of these markets, as I said, is growing at their own market dynamics. Some of these markets are mainly growing by the cannibalization of existing markets, and that actually holds true here for this area of SaaS. So SaaS is the public cloud market for applications, software as a service, and its main growth driver is the cannibalization of the existing traditional software market. If we look at the growth numbers and the sizing of all of these 12, so you see here the 12 markets, one on each other, and then calculated and forecasted, you see how big a market size actually cloud computing already is and how fast it will continue to grow. But again, it's important to understand that not every market will grow at the same speed and not every market grows on the same dynamics. Interesting is that by far the largest of all cloud markets is the software market for public software services. So the SaaS market by 2012 already reaches a size of $33 billion and will almost triple in the next 2 to 3 years. So 2015, for example, will be close to 80 billion. So this is a very, very strong growth, and it's significantly, of course, eating up and cannibalizing the traditional market. Of course, there is some net new markets as well. So some use case scenarios, some companies that might have not bought or into a packaged or standard applications, but with cloud they now do. But compared to the total market, the majority is really about a decision process of some new features, some new functions, some new applications and capabilities. Do I implement that on-premise or do I implement it in the cloud? So it's an either-or in many cases. The combined picture, of course, will always be a hybrid model, but individual licensing decisions will be in the cloud or on-premise in the future. If we look at adoption rates, we can see that by 2012, like 45% of all companies are already using software as a service from our global survey in North America and Europe. So that's a large number. But again, don't get confused. It's not 45% yet of the total market share. It's 45% of companies using some, SaaS application. And it's interesting to see that those that are using some SaaS application actually use already like 8 different SaaS applications, and that will grow to 20, 30 different SaaS applications in average per company over the next few years. So by 2013, it will be about 60%, so more than half of all companies will using at least some software as a service. So tremendous growth, and you see that the other public markets are growing also at a similar speed, but lower adoption rates. Actually, the SaaS market is driving a lot of the demand of the underlying platform and infrastructure markets that are of course also needed in order to support the software, which always needs to run on some platform, which will need to run on some infrastructure. Okay, but here and also in our market sizing, we only reflected the end consumer licensing and market spend. So within the SaaS numbers, there are some percentage that a SaaS application vendor who collects the subscription money from his customer, he will forward maybe to a PaaS or infrastructure vendor in case he doesn't have its own infrastructure or a technology platform, which is of course the case for by far the majority of smaller ISVs that partner up with platform providers or infrastructure hosting companies. So how much money this actually means out of the total budget for new software, we see here in this next picture. So in 2012, in average, out of the total software spending on new software, 12% was already going into SaaS. And in 2013, this will grow to 16% that will grow into SaaS. So here it's really the market share of SaaS spending as compared to the total software market spending of standard licensed software. It's also interesting to see here on the same picture that top performing companies have bought already much more aggressively into SaaS. So your customers, your top performing customers that have a year-over-year growth rate of 20% and more, that's how we define here top performers, they are already using much more software as a service than the lower performing peers. So there seems to be a correlation really between the business performance and their appetite to use more flexible deployment and innovation methodologies from the software market to their opportunities. So, because what is it that drives them to use software as a service, to use cloud application resources? It's very interesting to see, that when we ask companies what drives you to use software as a service, the top argument is because we want to improve our business agility. Okay, and then the next is we want to be able to better and more agile shift resources. Number 3, we want to improve the speed of the implementation. So it's really all about agility and speed. And you see that the arguments of we want to lower the overall cost, we want to substitute, CapEx by OpEx. It, of course, plays an important role, but it's not the top priorities anymore. Okay, and that has shifted actually, because when we compare these answers, what drives, your implementation and your roadmap to use SaaS? In 2009, the top argument was, we want to lower overall cost. And then it changed to 61% and 60%. So still important, but it's for you as a vendor, it's important to understand that the reasons of your customers why they are interested is not so much anymore because of the expectation to get a lower total cost, but to improve the business agility much more. And if you look at current subscription rates and compare them with perpetual license models, most different models have a break-even point of 5+ years, which means if you compare the license perpetual license cost plus 5 years maintenance cost, and you compare here the subscription cost, after 5 or more years, the subscription actually turns out to be at higher cost, which is okay for your customers because they understand that they have not necessarily only bought here into the financial model, they have bought into the improvement of agility and speed, which they expect from your software to their business. And we think that these changing drivers of cloud computing will actually continue. So in the past, it was cost and scalability. Today, it's more about speed and agility. And in the future, I think the main drivers why your customers will want to use your software in the cloud environment, it will be about innovation and collaboration. Okay, innovation and collaboration. So how do we get to that point? This slide shows you the current and future adoption rates of cloud computing for different software segments. On the left-hand side, we see what I call the first SaaS wave, which is the usual suspects of 4 software segments: CRM, collaboration like email, procurement, and human capital management. So if you look in the market and find, the typical cloud vendors or vendors that are associated today with SaaS, it's typically one out of these 4 categories, and they have indeed the highest adoption rates, currently around 25%, and will grow until 2013, end of 2013, so just a little bit more than a year from here, to almost 50% adoption rate in the market. But then there's a second wave of applications like PPM, business intelligence, order management, and it goes on. I mean, eventually cloud will not stop at any software segment. Cloud will cannibalize each and every software segment, but at different path and at different speed. And why is it that the left-hand side applications are, have higher adoption and are faster used in a cloud environment? It's because they are more kind of standalone applications, that's number one, and they don't carry, the most sensitive data. And if you go to the very far right of this spectrum, like finance, accounting, and ERP, those solutions need to be highly integrated into many other, elements and applications and databases, and they carry the most sensitive, financial data. But cloud computing will go there as well. It will not stop. It's just, at slightly slower speed. But of course, we see already quite significant success of ERP SaaS vendors, and that will certainly continue. Again, in hybrid models, for example, small companies using this, but even also large companies where corporate ERP might be on-premise and subsidiary ERP in a 2-tier model in SaaS. So it's going to each and every software segment. But it's interesting to see that in most scenarios, cloud SaaS applications are used to complement existing investments. Okay, and that is here the light green bar as compared to the darker green bar. In most cases, SaaS complements existing solutions, and it's not about the replacement of existing solutions. Let's take the example of HCM. The largest SaaS implementation that I'm aware of today is with Siemens rolling out a solution from SuccessFactors for their talent management capabilities. It was never the idea to replace their existing, HR payroll backbone solution, which happens to be from SAP, but rather to speed up the business agility to give their HR department e-recruiting, talent management, skill-based capabilities which were not there before. So on the one hand side, it clearly shows it doesn't really touch the most sensitive HR data, and it's really meant to complement and actually protect existing investments with some new innovative capabilities. That's why we're saying innovation will really drive future cloud applications. So, and there can be a lot of different examples what kind of innovation this could be. So innovation about collaborative processes. So if you're doing business as a cloud user with your peers, you might as well want to share data, to share documents, to share process steps with each other. And it's an interesting for you as a software vendor to consider and think of, what might your customers want to share with each other, and how you could support these collaborative processes. Or it's about seasonal scalability, about compliance, or new technology that your customers do not have the in-house skills, and therefore, in order to tap into this new technology innovation, are highly interested to move these capabilities into a cloud. So it's to keep the middle layer mostly in place and build cloud solutions around these, mainly to speed up the innovation with new capabilities to the business. Okay, so let's come to the next part, very important. So how to enable this? This obviously means a change to you as a software vendor, how to move now into the cloud, how to prepare your solution, how to understand what your customers actually need, and how to support this with a flexible platform. So we address the new software paradigm, right? It's a buy as you like, pay as you like, deploy as you like, and access the software as you like. So this certainly has an influence on you as a software company, how you will need to design and develop your solution in the future, how you will need to price and sell your solution in the future, how you will need to support the customers in the future, and what is your messaging and your positioning, what is your market for the future. And in order to address this, you will need to increase your insights on the customers. So for your product design, so for the development of new software, of new applications, it will be key, critical, important to understand what is used of your software already and what is not used, what features are not highly adopted by your customer base, and what is needed, what your clients would want to use. For your sales and your licensing and your billing, of course, you need to be able to closely track, how the software is used, in which way, who is accessing the software, how much is it used. Is that in compliance with the licensing agreement? Do you have actually the information, the data for correct billing of your solution? To support your customer, you need to better understand how the software is used. And could it be maybe better used or in different ways, right? And you need to collect the market insights about what resonates in the market, what do our users really like. And the challenge really is how do you collect that? So it's about getting deeper and better customer insights and understanding of the customer's needs and of the customer usage of what they have to be prepared to meet that flexibility. That actually it's not just a matter of the software industry or even the IT industry. I took this chart, which I liked a lot, actually from an IBM CEO study, and they show that for your customers also, no matter what business they are in, whether they are a retailer, a telecom, and utilities company, the priority number one today for CIOs has become to get better customer insights, getting closer to to our customers. And you see even a difference between, again here, top performers, so of your customers and their peers, the understanding how important customer insights is, and to know your customer is even 14% higher here on your top performing peers. So also your customers understand it. They have it on their charter, right? They need to understand their customers better, and they expect you to know better about them, and have the insights about what they need and how they use their software. Now, why is this a challenge today, and maybe even more so in the age of cloud computing? Let's look at the traditional, model of delivering a software application. So typically what you did is, you produce a CD or some other media, or even if it's a download link, right, and you deliver that to your customer. And then the key questions are, so who is using the software in order to do the right enforcement of the usage rights? What is used in order to have the right licensing model and being able to monitor and track and build this? And how is it used in order to better understand, what features and functions are in demand, what is not used? You need that for your further release planning, right? But the way how you got this information in the past was mainly, by a linear value chain model through an implementation service provider who is a close partner to you, who gives you a lot of feedback on how the solutions is used, or from your account manager who has a very deep understanding, hopefully, of his client and what he's using, what not, what he needs. There is a direct close link to your help desk, your service desk, and maybe you do from time to time some auditing, although many companies do not really enforce it. For some, actually, it's the only or most reliable way to measure really the usage and see if there are, some adjustments to the licensing and pricing actually required. Now, the challenging part is that with cloud computing, this kind of insights through implementation partner, account manager, help service desk is drastically reduced. It's not that it necessarily totally disappears, but it's not a reliable channel for you for customer insights anymore. And why is that? It's because in the traditional model, as you see here on the left-hand side of the slide, you are the software company, you have some partners, solution partners, technology partners. Maybe you have a reseller, there's an implementation partner, and that's the way how your software reaches the customer. And that's also the way, how customer insights get feeded back to you. And it's a linear model that provides you a linear, channel for your customer insights. In the age of cloud computing, this looks very different, okay? Because cloud computing is a partner eco play. What does that mean? That means a software vendor who offers SaaS services, of course, runs on a platform which runs on an infrastructure which uses a telecommunication network, and typically a service provider is also involved. So who is the customer-facing entity? In this case, it's not necessarily only the software vendor, and that's why we see, these interesting, cross-industry shifts of telecommunication vendors, offering applications, service vendors offering this, platform vendors, and so on. Okay, at the end of the day, it's an ecosystem, and I always say, the successful solutions in the market, in the cloud market in the future, is not individual cloud products, but it's a battle of partner ecosystems, of successful software vendors, cloud software vendors teaming with good platforms, with good infrastructure hosting vendors in order to provide an end solution to the customers, which then needs to be built on very solid SLA, service level agreements. But the challenge is, for each of those parties involved in this ecosystem, how can they collect the insights from the customer? In the future, really, you need to be able to collect, your customer insights directly from the customer. Your application and the technology architecture and the platform that your application runs on need to be able to translate back to you and keep you informed and updated on who is using your software for the enforcement. They need to keep you informed on what is used in your software so you can have the right licensing models and actually build them. But last not least also, how is it used? What features are in demand? What is not? And you will critically important need that for your further release planning and enhancements in your solution. So in the future, you need to collect software insights directly with the right architecture from the customers. You cannot necessarily, rely on your, value-added reseller and implementation partner ecosystem, which struggle all with the same challenge. They need to be able to keep the direct link to customer insights from their clients. Now, in the last part, relatively briefly and high level, only I want to outline that with these new models and new customer insights, the business processes within your company as a software vendor, the business process at software vendors are, changing a lot, really. So cloud computing and the new licensing models are really changing roles and responsibilities and business processes. Because in the past, the typical business processes are linear. So in the development cycle, there was typically a 3-year, or if you're a more agile software company, a yearly development cycle from planning, the testing and the shipment, and then comes the next release cycle. The pricing, used to be upfront licensing and then maintenance. So the sales was going through an RFI, RFP, offer, signature, and then, in some cases, run and move on to the next license and the next customer. Service and support is a linear model, and risk operation is a linear model. It also runs, with a business plan, a risk assessment, investment from each release cycle to the next, from one solution to the next. And that traditional linear model was to some extent, of course, beneficial to software companies because it was forcing your customers to complete a cycle and then move on to the next cycle, which maybe was then or is then an upselling opportunity for you. So one process triggers the next. And this discontinuity actually favored, in some cases, the business growth. But this is not a reliable model anymore, of course, in the area of cloud computing. Okay? In cloud computing, everything will become a continuous process where the individual process steps are all running in parallel at the same time. Okay? So the invention phase of understanding what your customers need to develop it, ship it, build to it, deploy it, and support it, is not 3 years or annual. These are monthly cycles or even, shorter cycles. All processes run at the same time. So you do have a continuous planning process which monitors at any time how your solution is used and what could be needed, and to feed that into the next continuous development cycle, which follows a continuous risk management. Okay, so it's not the risk management for individual large projects, it's the risk management for ongoing operations under these subscription models, which, as you will see, has a lot of benefits, of course, to not being so dependent anymore in upfront perpetual license income, because you have a much more reliable, steady, ongoing revenue stream. And the reason in the very beginning, when we said why the software industry was going through the recent economic crisis much less hurt than most other IT segments, was, of course, the maintenance fee that was coming in. Okay? But if you can turn an even larger part of your revenue stream into ongoing subscription streams, you become less and less vulnerable to market fluctuations, and stakeholders, really also shareholders, clearly understand that, once this is, addressed and communicated in the right way to your customers, but also to your share and stakeholders. This transformation, that you're moving from these linear cycles and release planning and perpetual models to more reliable and consistent revenue streams and deployment models is welcome not only by your customers, it's welcome by your stakeholders and by your shareholders. So the sales process will become much, much more continuous. Sales is more like a consulting activity of helping, in an engagement model, your customers, and not, sign and run to the next client. And of course, last not least, the support will become ongoing process. And all this is based on, constantly tracking, monitoring, and understanding your customer insights in a very deep and different level of detail, as you probably have been doing this up to now. So with this, I'm coming to my last slide, actually. I hope you found that useful, but if you don't remember anything else, I'd like to take you really away, that the cloud, of course, is here to stay. I hope no one, questions that anymore. But in order to be successful overall in the software market, it requires a lot of new flexibility from software vendors, not only in the deployment models like cloud, but also in the licensing and in the pricing. And in order to be that flexible, you need to collect customer insights. And you need to base this flexibility on your knowledge of understanding where the market is going. So cloud cannibalizes the traditional software market. So I really suggest you rather cannibalize your own traditional markets, but with new innovative solutions that companies would want to complement what they have invested into your solutions already, not necessarily taking your existing whole portfolio and moving it to the cloud, but making, very, clear decisions on, what makes sense to the cloud and tapping therefore into the growth market for the future. And last not least, understanding, of course, that with this move, this is a change process. This is a change management within your company. It's changing roles. It's changing responsibilities. It's a total business process change, but certainly for the better to be prepared for the future growth of the software market. And with this, I'm actually through with what I have prepared. I hope you found it interesting. As mentioned by Todd, if there are questions, we are happy to address those after this webinar, and I hand it back to Todd from SafeNet.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation today, Holger. I hope it is clear, really, to our audience how important customer insights are. If any of our audience members are looking for help on how they can gain better customer insights, either for billing or for product improvements, I really encourage them to visit our SafeNet's product offering at www.sentinelcloud.com, which provides flexible catalog management, allowing packaging your service in many different ways for different market segments, automated authorization provisioning, allowing feature-based control, and lastly, the tools to measure and analyze customer usage and insight. Again, I would like to thank Holger and Forrester Research for their time today.
Thank you, everyone.